Chapter 2. The following day, Elias could not help but dwell on the events of the previous night. The memories clung to him like perfume that refused to fade. He was feeling too many things at once. Fear, anticipation, confusion, and something far more dangerous that he did not dare to name. He was afraid of the uncertainty. All his life, Elias had felt unwanted, an afterthought in his own household, and now he found himself wondering what life with the Duke would truly be like. He had been groomed for this very purpose, educated, polished, and trained to become the perfect Omega consort. So why did doubt coil so tightly around his heart? Why did the future feel less like a triumph and more like the edge of a precipice? He should have been grateful. He was not being married off to some aging nobleman seeking a docile ornament for his estate. Instead, he was promised to one of the most eligible bachelors in the empire, perhaps the strongest and most dominant alpha duke of their generation. It was a blessing beyond imagination, an honor bestowed upon his family and upon him. People would whisper in envy. Alliances would strengthen. His family name would rise higher than it ever had before. By all logic, this was fortune smiling upon him. And yet his chest felt tight. His thoughts drifted back to their interaction at the ball, the Duke's calculated responses, every measured word, every careful movement. There had been restraint in Adrian, a precision that bordered on coldness. Elias remembered the subtle shift in the Duke's expression, the faint discomfort that flickered across his features when he had caught the scent of Elias's pheromones. Logic reminded him that Adrian had not sought this alliance. Logic recalled the cool detachment in the Duke's voice when he spoke of forced bonds and obligations imposed by the crown. Logic warned him not to romanticize what was clearly political necessity. And yet, his biology betrayed him. Every time he recalled the scent of cedarwood and iron, something deep and instinctive stirred within him. The warmth of Adrian's hand at his waist had not been imagined. It had been steady, grounding, possessive in a way that made Elias's breath falter. When he closed his eyes, he could almost feel it again. The firm press of fingers against silk, the subtle heat radiating through layers of fabric. His Omega nature whispered treacherous things into the quiet of his mind. Mate, bond, belong. The words echoed softly, insistently. Elias had lived 18 years without warmth, without protection, without affection freely given. He had survived on scraps of acknowledgement, endured indifference at best and cruelty at worst. He had learned to make himself small, to expect little, to brace for disappointment before it arrived. He did not think he could survive a lifetime of polite distance. To stand beside a man who would never truly look at him. To share a bed warmed by duty rather than desire. To carry a title but never a place in someone's heart. The thought hollowed him out, but he had no choice. The imperial decree had already been drafted. The marriage contract would be signed within the week, sealed with ink and expectation. Once the signatures dried, there would be no turning back, no reprieve granted to second thoughts or fragile hopes. And then, he would leave the capital, leave the only world he had ever known. The following days passed like a swift breeze, slipping through his fingers before he could properly grasp them. The entire household was in a frenzy, consumed by the grand preparations for the wedding. Servants hurried through the corridors with bolts of silk and trays of jewels. Stewards argued over guest lists and seating arrangements. Elias' family oversaw every detail with relentless precision. Nothing could fall short. Nothing could be less than magnificent. Every flower, every ribbon, every dish served at the banquet had to reflect perfection. It was not merely a wedding, it was a statement. And as the days blurred together in a whirl of silk, gold, and expectation, Elias could not help but feel suffocated. Every garment he was to wear had already been chosen for him. Every heirloom he was to present, every gift he was to receive, every item to be sent as dowry had been carefully inspected and approved by his family. Even the embroidery on his ceremonial robes had been decided without his input. He stood at the center of it all, yet felt strangely absent from his own life. He was the groom, and yet he had no voice. The only things that were truly his, untouched by scrutiny or political calculation, were his books and his quills. They were not grand or valuable in the way jewels were, but they were his. Margins filled with his notes, pressed flowers tucked between pages, ink stains that marked restless nights of study. Those were pieces of himself no one had thought to claim. He made sure to secure them carefully and pack them away himself, refusing to entrust the task to anyone else. If he was to leave everything behind, at least he would carry his thoughts with him. On the day before his marriage, when the house finally quieted in the late hours of the evening, Elias sat alone in his chamber and allowed himself to think. Tomorrow his life would change irrevocably. He had often listened to acquaintances and distant friends speak of their wedding nights with flushed cheeks and shy laughter. They would confess how nervous they had been, how giddy with anticipation, how their hearts had raced with excitement and fear intertwined. They spoke of it as though it were a threshold, terrifying, yes, but thrilling in equal measure. Elias wondered why he felt none of those things. There was no flutter of excitement in his chest, no breathless curiosity, no romantic anticipation waiting to bloom beneath the surface. There was only a quiet stillness, a heaviness, a question he could not silence. Was it wrong that he did not feel giddy? Was it unnatural that the thought of his wedding night stirred not butterflies, but an ache of uncertainty? He tried to summon the emotions others had described, to imagine himself blushing and hopeful, but the image would not hold. Instead, he found himself wondering not about the night itself, but about the mornings that would follow. What kind of husband would Adrian be when the ceremony ended and the guests dispersed? Would he remain distant and composed, bound to Elias by duty alone? Or would something softer emerge in the privacy of shared space? Would Elias become a partner, or merely a responsibility? As the moonlight spilled across his chamber floor, Elias pressed his fingers against the cool glass of the window and stared into the darkness beyond. Tomorrow he would stand before the empire and pledge himself to a man who had not chosen him. And still his heart remained quiet, not nervous, not giddy, just waiting. On the day of the grand wedding, Elias stood before the tall mirror in his chamber, gazing at his reflection as though it belonged to someone else. His hair fell neatly down his back, brushed until it shone like polished silk. The white ceremonial garb draped around him was heavy yet elegant, adorned with jewels that caught the morning light and golden-threaded embroidery that traced intricate patterns across the fabric. This had once been his grandfather's wedding attire, carefully preserved for decades and now tailored precisely to his own slender frame. The weight of tradition rested on his shoulders as tangibly as the layered silk. Despite his efforts to remain composed, his heart beat unevenly in his chest, betraying the calm mask he wore. Each breath felt slightly too shallow, each second stretched thin with anticipation. He did not know what to do with his hands. He did not know what to do with himself. A sharp knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Moments later, Lord Elias Whitemore entered the chamber, his expression brisk and authoritative. "Hurry up. Everything is in order. We need to leave." At once, the maidservants moved into action. They adjusted the fall of his sleeves, smoothed invisible creases from the pristine fabric, and carefully lowered the delicate veil over his head. Nimble fingers secured it into place, ensuring that not a single strand of hair lay out of line. The jewels at his collar were straightened, the embroidered hem aligned perfectly for the procession ahead. When the lords exited the room, their footsteps echoing down the corridor, the maidservants lingered for just a second longer. They exchanged glances before looking back at Elias, and a soft sigh escaped one of them. He looked beautiful, not merely adorned, beautiful. The grand doors of the chapel opened with a resonant creak that seemed to echo in his bones. Music swelled, low and ceremonial, filling the vast space with solemn reverence. Elias stepped forward, his arm linked with his father's, and began the slow walk down the aisle. As they entered, the crowd rose to their feet in unison. Nobles dressed in their finest attire turned to watch him. Whispers fluttered through the hall like restless wings. Beneath the veil, the world felt distant and dreamlike, as though he were walking through a memory rather than living it. The polished floor gleamed beneath him, reflecting chandeliers and stained glass in fractured shards of gold and crimson light. Through the thin cascade of silk before his eyes, Elias allowed himself the smallest glance toward the front rows reserved for the highest authority of the realm. There, seated with unmistakable presence, was the king. The monarch's attire was regal yet restrained, a silent reminder that even on a noble's wedding day, the crown overshadowed all. His expression was unreadable, composed with the practiced neutrality of one who ruled an empire. Flanking him on either side stood his royal bodyguards, tall, immovable figures clad in ceremonial armor that shimmered beneath the chapel lights. Their hands rested near the hilts of their weapons, their gazes sharp and ever vigilant, scanning the hall with disciplined precision. The sight sent a subtle chill down Elias's spine. This was no ordinary union. The king's presence alone was proof that this marriage was not merely a personal affair but a matter of political significance, an alliance witnessed and sanctioned by the throne itself. The weight of it pressed more firmly upon his shoulders. Every step he took echoed louder in his ears now, as though the entire empire were watching. He lowered his gaze again, steadying his breathing beneath the veil. For a fleeting moment, he felt as though he were walking on clouds, untethered, suspended between the life he had known and the one awaiting him. But he steadied himself, matching his steps to his father's measured pace. When they reached the front of the chapel, his father gently released his arm. It was only then that Elias lifted his gaze and saw him, his husband. Adrian stood tall in ceremonial black and gold, the tailored lines of his attire accentuating his broad shoulders and commanding presence. There was something almost magnetic about him, an aura that seemed to draw the air itself toward him. His posture was composed, his expression restrained, yet power radiated from him effortlessly. For a heartbeat, Elias forgot to breathe. The man before him was devastatingly handsome, but it was more than that. It was the quiet strength in the way he carried himself, the sharp focus in his eyes as they met Elias's through the thin veil. Elias faltered slightly, his step catching for a fraction of a second, before he gathered himself and came to stand directly before him. Close enough to feel his warmth, close enough to sense the faint, familiar scent beneath the ceremonial incense. The priest cleared his throat, stepping forward between them. His voice rose, solemn and steady, beginning the sacred rites and ancient vows that would bind them together before the empire and the gods alike. And as the formalities commenced, Elias stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the chapel, heart racing, destiny unfolding with every spoken word. As the ceremony reached its final stage, the air inside the chapel seemed to grow heavier, thicker with anticipation. The priest's voice rang clear beneath the vaulted ceiling as he gestured for both Elias and Adrian to turn toward one another. Slowly, deliberately, they faced each other. For a brief second, the world narrowed to the space between them. Adrian lifted his hands and reached for the delicate veil. His movements were unhurried, steady. Yet there was something almost reverent in the way his fingers brushed the fine fabric. The veil slipped back, revealing Elias's face to him fully at last. Cool air kissed Elias's skin, and for the first time that day, nothing stood between their gazes. The priest stepped closer, his expression solemn. "Join hands and recite the vow." Adrian extended his hand first. Elias hesitated only a fraction of a heartbeat before placing his own into it. The contact sent a subtle warmth up his arm, firm, grounding, undeniable. Adrian's grip was strong but not crushing, steady in a way that eased something fragile inside him. Adrian spoke first, his voice low and resonant. carrying easily through the silent chapel. I, Adrian Blackwood. Elias swallowed, his pulse thrumming loudly in his ears, and followed. I, Elias Whitemore. Then, together, their voices intertwined beneath the sacred arches. Take you as my lawful husband and bind myself to you under oath. The words hung in the air, ancient and binding. The priest inclined his head. Repeat after me. And so they did. They vowed loyalty before crown and gods. They vowed protection and partnership. They vowed to uphold one another's honor, to share burdens and triumphs alike. They vowed fidelity not merely in body, but in name and duty. With each sentence spoken, Elias felt the invisible threads of fate tightening around them. No longer a distant decree written in imperial ink, but a promise shaped by their own voices. When the final oath was completed, silence followed. Sacred, absolute, two hands still joined, two lives irrevocably bound. Elias's heart began to beat faster, the rhythm loud and insistent in his ears. And yet, strangely, he felt more grounded than he had all morning. Adrian's hand was still wrapped around his, warm and steady, anchoring him to the present. At a subtle nod from the Duke, Adrian's attendant stepped forward, carrying a velvet cushion upon which two rings rested. Both bands were crafted from pure gold, their surfaces engraved with delicate, almost imperceptible patterns that caught the light. Set into each was a blue diamond, deep and luminous, the color reminiscent of a twilight sky just before nightfall. His mother had briefed him carefully about this moment. During the ceremony, he would be given the blue diamond ring, the symbol of the Dukeship of Blackwood. It was more than a jewel. It was legacy, authority, a mark that he now belonged to one of the most powerful houses in the empire. Adrian released one of Elias's hands only long enough to take the ring from the cushion. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met again, searching, unreadable. Then Adrian slid the ring onto Elias's finger. Fit perfectly, not too tight, not too loose, as though it had been measured with quiet precision. The weight of it settled against his skin, cool at first, then gradually warming with his body heat. Elias stared at it briefly, at the blue stone now resting against his hand, and felt the undeniable shift within himself. This was real. He lifted the second ring with fingers that trembled only slightly. Carefully, he guided it onto Adrian's finger. The gold gleamed against the Duke's hand, strong and steady beneath his touch. When the ring was fully in place, their hands lingered together for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then the chapel erupted into applause. The sound swelled around them. Nobles clapping, whispers rising into celebratory murmurs, the rustle of fine garments as the audience expressed their approval. It echoed against the stone walls, vibrant and triumphant. The priest raised his hands for silence, his voice resonating clearly through the hall. By the authority vested in me, and in the name of the gods, I now pronounce you husbands. The word rang out, final, sacred, irrevocable. Husbands. Elias felt the weight of it settle upon him more heavily than the ring. No longer betrothed, no longer promised, bound. That's it for today's video. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Thank you.